Hello and welcome to my easy to understand guide to this time's set text and representation. This video is going to be particularly relevant for you if you're studying AQA GCSE Media Studies, as it's currently a set text on that specification. Start by having a look at the representation of Donald Trump, Elon Musk and America in general. Elon Musk is obviously represented as a billionaire, a close Trump advisor. He seems very powerful, quite elite, but he also seems to be represented as quite informed and educated and therefore perhaps quite credible for an audience. The Times does tend to be aimed at a slightly more centre to right political audience who tend to probably be more conservative and more Trump supporters. And so that perhaps explains why people like Trump and Musk are represented in a reasonably positive way. Zelensky is mentioned here as well. He's called the despised dictator, which is a quote by Musk. So it's not the newspaper's opinion, but their choice to include this quote suggests a fairly negative representation of Zelensky. He's not given his own voice, so there's no counterbalance here. And, perhaps, again, this reflects the newspaper's tendency to veer slightly to the right politically, maybe less positive representation of Zelensky and Ukraine. If we have a look at the representation of men, the parts about Bond obviously offer this idealized representation of masculinity, very strong, very powerful, the typical hero. He's very charming, women hanging off of him, high class, successful. He's got a suit, a gun, seems quite unemotional. This is a fairly stereotypical representation of masculinity, or certainly idealized masculinity. And it would offer a kind of aspirational role model to male readers.
The newspaper seems to focus primarily on the upper classes of society, so including information about billionaires such as Musk, talking about James Bond, who has always been shown as a very wealthy upper class character. And this focus on middle to upper class lifestyles, particularly with things like the property pullout, that will appeal to those middle class readers looking for an aspirational lifestyle.
When Starmer is quoted about offering a youth visa scheme, this seems fairly politically neutral. It doesn't really offer a judgment about whether this is a good or a bad thing. So although the newspaper presents itself as being fairly politically neutral, the choice not to include an image and just to focus very kind of depersonalised on just the policy that the Labour government are offering, that may reflect the fact that the newspaper is slightly right-leaning politically, and their readers perhaps are more conservative supporters. So offering a slightly depersonalised view of the Labour Party makes sense. Representations of women are fairly stereotypical, quite sexualised representations, very little clothing, certainly hanging off of men, seen as secondary, passive characters. It's a very patriarchal representation, and certainly any feminist theory would be good here. Somebody like Laura Mulvey and the male gaze, and women readers may feel slightly alienated by this old-fashioned representation.
Barbara Broccoli is represented on the pages, and she does seem to be quite powerful. She's wearing expensive clothes and attending film premieres. And it mentions that she's in partnered control of the Bond franchise before they sold the rights to Amazon. So seemingly quite powerful. However, the newspaper article also mentions several times that she was given ownership of the Bond franchise by her father. And so ultimately men still represented as being far more powerful than women. Other than the women in the picture of James Bond, there are no other women really mentioned on the paper, and certainly no other women pictured. And this underrepresentation of women in the paper may reflect the mostly male readership, but it does also reflect a fairly patriarchal ownership of the newspaper industry in general. It's worth mentioning that there are mostly only white actors mentioned in the newspaper pages. And this is, partly to do with the fact that, a lot of the article is about James Bond. And as of today, James Bond has only ever been played by white actors. But this itself has been a bit of a bone of contention. A lot of people are saying that with so many people having played Bond in the past, perhaps it is time for us to have a bit more ethnic diversity. And this lack of representation of ethnic minorities in Hollywood has been something that has been discussed more in recent years. Certainly, the fact that the newspaper has chosen to only include images of white people in their pages may reflect an ethnocentrism in the paper, in the newspaper industry, and in particular in the Times, which has a fairly white readership. There is one black actor featured on the pages, which is Idris Elba. He is someone that has been mentioned a few times as a potential actor to play James Bond in the future, although it's worth pointing out that even just the mention of his name has resulted in some quite racist backlash online from audiences who don't think a black actor should play a character who has historically only been played by white actors so far.
Amazon as a company is represented as very powerful, quite intrusive, and really having an impact on changing Britain culturally. Having said that, though, it is a bit more neutral than the Daily Mirror representation of Amazon. It simply says Amazon holds the casting vote. So it suggests that Amazon is powerful. They are the powerful, dominating, controlling factor here. But it doesn't necessarily suggest whether this is going to have a really negative or positive impact. And that's potentially because big corporations are often behind companies like the Times. And so they don't really want to alienate large corporations like Amazon, who could be potential friends of their companies and donors in the future. So that was my easy to understand guide to the Times and representation. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for other videos that are going to be relevant for you, including this set text. And if you would like a video that I don't already have, leave a little comment below and I'll see what I can do.